Hey everybody, I'll be talking about the crime of homicide. Homicide is a very complicated crime, and it can be broken down into many different features. I'm going to talk about murder, first-degree murder, second-degree murder, and two forms of manslaughter that can be broken down into voluntary manslaughter and involuntary manslaughter. So let's get down to talking about what homicide actually means. It's a very simple definition. It means a killing by a human being against another human being. B kills A. Therefore, B is liable for homicide. B committed a homicide. So let's get into what murder means, and we can see the different features and different elements of how someone can be liable for a certain type of homicide. So let's talk about murder. A murder means the unlawful killing of another with malice aforethought. Malice aforethought is the mens rea of murder. It is the mental intent that the defendant had when he or she decided to kill the other person. We have express malice, which means the intent to kill. And we have implied malice, which means the intent to cause serious bodily injury. So in order for the prosecution to make the defendant liable for murder, we need malice aforethought, which is that the defendant had the mental intent, the desire to kill the victim. As I said, express malice is the intent to kill, and implied malice is the intent to cause serious bodily injury. It's very important because if the prosecution cannot prove malice aforethought, the defendant can't be liable for murder. Moreover, it has to be an unlawful killing. It can't be a situation where the defendant actually defended him or herself. Okay? So let's get into first-degree murder, which is the most complicated form of homicide. It means the specific intent to kill plus premeditation and deliberation. This is how we talked about other videos. The specific intent of a criminal when he or she decides to commit a crime is when the criminal had the specific intent in their mind, the mental state in their mind, to know that when they commit that act, it will lead to specific consequences. So the defendant in first-degree murder knew that their act would lead to the killing of the victim. Moreover, we need premeditation and deliberation. What do these mean? Premeditation, it means the defendant had the mindset, basically the plan, to kill the other person. The defendant had the requisite intent to say, I'm going to kill this person. This is my plan. I have to end his or her person's life, right? So we go into deliberation, which means a cold-blooded act, not an impulsive act. Example, my friend Riley makes a decision to kill our friend Israel. He plans it in his mind that I'm going to kill him. This is something that I want to do. And he deliberates by killing him in a cold-blooded way, which is him getting a baseball bat and beating him to death with a bat, and him stabbing him in the back, or getting a gun and shooting him in the head. That is an example of a cold-blooded act. He deliberated by shooting him. He premeditated by thinking about killing him, and he knew that his consequences of his acts would lead to the murder of Israel. We go on to second-degree murder. Second-degree murder is very critical because it is very different than murder and also first-degree murder. So second-degree murder means all murder except in the first degree with a depraved heart. A depraved heart means that the defendant's acts were a conscious disregard for human life. That the defendant knew that his or her acts would be a total disregard for human life, and his or her acts will lead to someone's death. An example of this is that I know this crazed-out guy named Eric Brown. He likes to drink, he likes to smoke. Let's say he makes the decision to drink and drive. He knows in his head, he has mental intent, that he knows that drinking alcohol will make him intoxicated, and he still makes that decision to drive behind the wheel. And he happens to kill someone. That is an example of Eric having a depraved heart. Because of his acts of being drunk and making that personal choice to drive behind the wheel, his acts led to someone's death. Therefore, he could be liable for second-degree murder. let's move on to voluntary manslaughter. What's very important about voluntary manslaughter is that it's like kissing cousins with first-degree murder. The big difference between first-degree murder and voluntary manslaughter is the very fact that this happened very impulsively, that the defendant still had the intent, right? Look, an intentional homicide with malice mitigated. The defendant still intended to kill. However, the person's thought process of wanting to kill that person is mitigated down because the person either acted in imperfect self-defense or acted with provocation for the heat of passion. I want to get into these, but these are very complicated issues, so I'm going to speak about it very broadly. The heat of passion is when the defendant was provoked, and this provocation caused the defendant to act with passion rather than reason. And the reasonable person under the defendant's similar or same circumstances would have, that the reasonable prudent person under the defendant's similar or same circumstances would have acted with passion rather than reason by getting provoked by what he saw. An example of the heat of passion is a man coming home from work and seeing his wife in bed with another man. That would provoke any reasonable person underneath that same circumstance because that is his lover and she's in bed with someone he doesn't even know. Okay? The guy was provoked by what he saw and he acted with passion rather than reason because he made the decision to kill either the wife, the man in bed with the wife, or both. That is an example of voluntary manslaughter with using this element of the heat of passion to mitigate his charge down from the intentional homicide from first-degree murder. That's why I think that first-degree murder and voluntary manslaughter are like kissing cousins because they're so much alike. The defendant still had the intent to kill, however, his malice is mitigated because of him acting with provocation. Moreover, when we get into imperfect self-defense, which is very, very, very important, is that the defendant believed, he reasonably believed that he was under imminent serious bodily injury or death. And if he didn't act fast, that person may have suffered serious bodily injury or death. However, the defendant was not truly under that situation. An example of this is someone happened to have a carry and seal gun and they happen to get scared and they suddenly react and shoot someone who scared them because they thought that they were going to get attacked. That wasn't the case. And the defendant happened to kill someone with their gun. That is as an example of imperfect self-defense because that person truly wasn't under reasonable serious bodily injury or imminent death. So I want to move on to involuntary manslaughter. Involuntary manslaughter, I'm going to write up here. And of course, a lot of things I'm saying here, I'm being very broad because this is complicated stuff. Worked on this for over a month, so I'm not expecting to cram a whole month of material into a small video. So I'm going to use the black marker here, it's better to see. All right, involuntary manslaughter, which means the unintentional homicide of another without malice. The defendant did not intend to kill. That's why it's important to know that this was an unintentional homicide, okay? And the defendant did not have malice because the defendant did not plan or have the desire to cause the death of the victim. However, nevertheless, by the defendant's criminal negligence and acts, that is what led to the homicide of the victim. So a critical example is criminal negligence. Okay? An example of this is a mother neglecting to breastfeed her child, and her child ends up dying because she did not properly feed her kid. She did not mean to kill her kid. She didn't have the intent. She unintentionally caused the homicide of her child, but because she was criminally negligent by not feeding her child properly, the child unfortunately died. That is an example of involuntary manslaughter. So these different forms of manslaughter are very, very complicated. They can make or break whether someone's going to be in jail for the rest of their life or whether they're going to be in jail for 5 to 7 years. It's very, very complicated stuff. It depends on what happened in the fact pattern, whether you're taking a criminal law essay or you happen to see a big story in the news. It's very important to understand these things. If you have any more questions,